Welcome to Mind, Money, Balance, the no guilt, no shame podcast to help you get your mind and money in balance. I'm your host, Lindsay. I'm a financial therapist and coach, woman of color, and popcorn connoisseur. I am so glad you're here. Let's go. It has been a hard few months if you have been around the Mind, Money, Balance podcast for a little while. So I'm really excited to welcome today's guest who is going to help me and hopefully you take your mind off of things, because rest is resistance, joy is resistance. You can take a break from the news. I am telling you just as much as I am telling myself this. It seems like every time I open up my phone, there is a new story or video or post that is just gonna break me wide open. We are going to welcome Taylor Broughton, who is an American psychotherapist based in Edinburgh, Scotland. She runs an online private practice in the UK called Just Human Therapy. You might follow her on Instagram at a similar handle, where she works to make therapy a normal part of taking care of yourself so people can learn to live more intentionally. In this episode, we will get into how she filled up her practice quickly, how she used something that a lot of new therapists get hung up on, being young, to her advantage, how she's used social media kind of as a way to provide additional supports for herself as she kind of shifted into a private pay model, and so much more. So I hope you enjoy this episode and make sure to stay tuned throughout the end as we get into the 3 takeaways from my episode and interview with Taylor. Hey, Taylor, I'm so happy to have you here on the Mind, Money, Balance podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, and you are joining us from Scotland, but listeners can probably tell you don't quite have that Edinburgh accent. So tell myself and the listeners what brought you there.
Yeah, actually a modern day love story, which is funny. I met my partner in my last year of university. He was traveling for work and he's Scottish, and we met in Colorado. And basically I was applying to PhD programs in clinical psychology. I took a break from after sending out all those applications, as you might be familiar with, took a break, traveled, came here and visited him. At the airport on the plane ride home, I was like, I'm just going to look and see if they have any psychotherapy programs here. And there was one that really kind of fit my theoretical orientation here in Edinburgh. And I applied, and it came down between that and a school in Texas. And now I've been in Edinburgh for about 4 years now.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love that story. And I love hearing just different ways that people end up in the places that they are. So why don't we dive right in and tell us a little bit about your money story and your money journey?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing as I've been reflecting on this is you hear all the time as a therapist going out to private practice, especially if you're young, that it'll take a lot of time and that it will basically, you just kind of have to like sell yourself out there and it might not work. And I kind of had the opposite experience where I was full too fast. I grew too quickly. And I really kind of had to step back and go, okay, what do I want to do with my time? What do I actually want to charge? Being an American here and how I thought about money versus how money was talked about here in the UK, especially as therapists, I kind of felt like I was out on my own trying to figure out a lot of this and forming kind of my own idea about, I guess, what I believe therapists need to do for themselves to avoid burnout, especially when you're filling up too quickly.
So you had heard these stories about things are going to take time. You have to kind of pay your dues, right? I hear a lot of clinicians kind of say that they were taught that before they go into private practice, they have to put in so many years of work. You know, going into private practice is kind of a right. And I kind of heard that undertone there of like, you have to put in your time, you have to do all these things, and it's going to be hard and it's going to take a lot of time. And you had this experience of, yes, of course, I imagine there were parts of going into private practice, but also the experience of having your practice fill up quickly. Why do you think your practice filled up more quickly than taught that it would?
That's a great question. There's not that many therapists on Instagram in the UK, probably compared to the States, mostly probably based off size. And especially in Scotland, there's an older demographic of therapists here. I think I just stood out a bit that I had a social media presence. I wasn't kind of afraid to show my face and be more bold on Instagram with different posts, or be even just being colorful, a colorful therapist amongst all these kind of gray Edinburgh Psychology Today profiles. I think I did stand out to a younger audience that was like, okay, I need therapy, but it's kind of terrifying to go to therapy. I don't know where to look. And they saw someone approachable that looked like them in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And I think that you hit the nail on the head in a lot of ways there, which is, again, this message that we get as therapists is it's not about us. It's about sitting back. It's about being quiet, about blending in. And the reality is, yes, we do have a role of sitting back and observing and listening. And in order to help therapy seekers find us, it's imperative that we lean into our unique personalities. And I think that's so important, especially in today's day and age where you go onto something like Psychology Today and there are hundreds and hundreds of listings and they all look and sound more or less the same, right? I'm a psychotherapist for children's, families, adults, couples, at all walks of life. I will compassionately hold space and empathically listen. And it's like, if I'm a person scrolling through that, I'm like, A, I don't know what that means. And B, are you really going to help me? Or are you just going to help anyone who walks through your door? So would you say that kind of niching down and specializing in a way really helped you to stand out?
Yeah, I've been juggling with what niching means to me lately. It's been on my head of that there's different ways to niche, I think. And I think some ways that I've done that, I'm a psychodynamic therapist. So in some ways I'm trained pretty old school, long-term therapy. I work with people for years. I work with a lot of relational trauma, and I'm young and colorful, right? So there's kind of this juxtaposition there of that. And I think in some ways that has helped me niche. Is I'm very opposite from CBT and things like that. And especially with free healthcare here, a lot of people do go through the NHS. They fight for therapy. If they're really lucky, they might get 6 sessions of CBT and they're like, this isn't cutting it out for me. This isn't what I needed. So then I think I really try to speak into the fact that therapy is hard. It takes a long time to unlearn and relearn our behaviors and things about ourselves and coming to terms with our history. And I guess that's what just human's all about to me, is that, we're human. This is tough stuff. And everybody that I've had since I've opened have said, oh, that spoke to me, that there isn't a quick fix. I don't think I want a quick fix. I think I want to know and understand. So I think that, I don't know if that's a niche. That's what I'm trying to answer in my own head. But that has, I think, created a different spin than what you see here in terms of how people talk about mental health.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about how money shows up differently in Scotland, just generally. And then I'd love to talk about how it shows up in the therapy space. So what are some big differences, or maybe subtle differences in the culture of money between the States and there in Edinburgh?
Yeah. If you look here, therapists on average charge much, much lower than therapists in the US, much, much lower. Mm-hmm. That's on average. That's me generalizing. But you'll look around a lot of cities here and see £40 an hour for psychotherapy. And that's
which is approximately
really
how much US dollars?
50.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Yeah. And yes, so there's already that difference there. There's a difference here of you can go the NHS route and try to kind of do more behavior focused therapy that way. You can branch out to private practice and test your luck, or you can work for organizations or charities where you're paid pretty low income, similar to organizational work in the US. I think on top of that, some of the training centers here to become a therapist, they're really expensive, especially if you're not from here. If you're from any other country besides the UK, you're in a serious amount of student debt. So there's this interesting thing here that therapists are working crazy hours trying to make an income off of that, but also told to not really talk about money, that maybe you should do a lot of work for free. The last day of my training program, they talked about jobs on the last day and the last day only. And they said, a lot of therapists just volunteer for about 10 years so they get comfortable enough to go into private practice and begin charging. So that narrative was quite strong, especially being an American, where money's talked about, I think, a bit more honestly, even in the therapy world.
Mm-hmm. okay, so we've got this interesting mix there. It sounds like on the one hand, you have things more like a social democracy where you have more access to versions of healthcare. And at the same time, you have this old school mentality that I agree. I think in the States, we're starting to talk about it more as therapists, about saying you have to charge in accordance with a sustainable wage for you. But you're hearing a lot of the things that we often heard in grad school, like you have to stick it out, you didn't do this for the money, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you think having access to something like the NHS changes things? And also, could you just briefly tell us what the NHS is?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the NHS is, I think, National Health Service. So it's free healthcare, mental health, physical health. You can go to the hospital here. You're not going to get a bill sent afterwards. Prescriptions are free in Scotland as well for the most part. So that's definitely a different cultural thing. So a lot of people will go to the NHS for mental health support. They'll go to their GP, and
which is
their general practitioner, their doctor. And basically, it takes pretty severe cases for people to get any type of therapy. A lot of people are given kind of a CBT app on their phone to do first. And if that doesn't help, then eventually they might come face to face with a practitioner for a shortened amount of sessions. So there are some other types of therapy that can be offered through the NHS, and you can kind of go a psychiatry route, more the medical model that's probably similar to some psychologists in the US. But there is a big divide even here between psychologists and psychotherapists or counselors. And all of this to a client doesn't matter, right? They're just looking for somebody to talk to that sees them. So I think private practices are booming right now, especially the demand that I'm seeing. All my colleagues are full, there's nobody to refer to. And I think that does show there's a demand where people are valuing direct mental health support in a way that they're not having to wait a long time, and they can choose their practitioner and know it's not going to be a different practitioner showing up the next week at an NHS service, because they're just taking what they can get. So I do think the value of that is, I hope, becoming more normalized, that people talk about going to therapy and paying for it too.
Yeah. So for folks who don't go through the NHS, they pay out of pocket for therapy there?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. There is such thing as private healthcare here. It's a bit more niche to get. And I think the mental health coverage of it isn't great anyways, if that's the route that you're going down. Some people will get therapy paid for through their employer. So some therapists are on panels for kind of employee assistant programs, but that kind of can be a niche in itself for some therapists. That's the type of client they see, is somebody through their work. So as you know, there's all sorts of different implications with where you accept your clients from.
Yeah. How did you end up being so seemingly confident about going into private practice and charging a rate that is sustainable for you in a culture that has really said to undervalue your work and kind of is quiet about allowing people to go into private practice? How did you get to where you are?
Partly, I began working for an organization that was a private organization, which is pretty rare here. And the price tag was high for UK standards. So I began to kind of accept the fact that clients were willing to pay me that, right? I worked there for a while, and I got used to the fact that, okay, clients are paying me this. I, at the time, was making minimum wage from that employer, basically. So that's a whole separate problem. But I was kind of trying to internalize that clients pay me this. They show up week after week, month after month, and they value me at that price. And so when I jumped to private practice, it was like, do I keep my fee the same? Do I go higher? I had a supervisor told me to cut it in half or I wouldn't get clients. And I felt really offended by that and trying to kind of figure out, wait, where do I stand and what do I actually need to do this work sustainably? And I think for the most part, all of my resources have been US based, which is kind of disappointing that there's not as much of a platform, I guess, for those conversations here yet. But I do see it with my colleagues here that we're able to talk about things like raising our fees. And I've already raised my fees since opening last year, which I was not at all expecting to do. But I kind of had to adjust. I was full. I was working a bit too many hours. We're in the middle of a pandemic. I had health issues. I kind of had to look and go, okay, what can I do? What do I actually need to charge to give my clients my full self and to not be feeling overworked?
So you mentioned that the resources you were looking to for help raising your fees or help with money mindset were really United States based. Was it more the mental and emotional side that you were looking for support for, or is it more the tactical, how much to charge that you were looking for support for? And where did you find those resources?
Yeah, it was a bit of both, I think, because my confidence was a bit shaken. I think being an American in British culture, you're already a bit loud, you're already a bit too confident.
Right.
So I got that a lot, even in my grad school program of not, fitting into the culture and that not being acceptable, And so I think I already had those fears there of, oh, am I doing something wrong by showing up and being myself? And also practically, what can I charge? How do you go about having these conversations when I didn't really have a ton of tangible support here for that? So I found things like Marie Fang, private practice skills, private practice workshop was another one I listened to a lot. I found you on Instagram at some point last year. What was the other one? Healing Strategy, Josie, she's great. So I think having that be a part of my Instagram feed and, YouTube videos I watched and podcasts I listened to at the time that I was making that transition was really useful because it kind of just started normalizing those conversations in my head of, okay, what do I think about this? What am I comfortable talking about with clients? And what conversations do I want to have with supervisors here? And which decisions do I kind of have to make on my own of what's going to work for me? And I can't really get approval for, I just have to do. And that, I don't know if I've been confident with that, but I think I've had to kind of know I have clients who want to work with me and I love doing my job. And it's really important that I can keep doing it in a way that makes sense to me. Or we're our only tool as therapists. I felt like I kind of had to protect that.
What do you think would have happened if you hadn't created a sustainable fee for yourself in Scotland? What do you think the outcome might have been if you had followed your supervisor's?
I think I would have just burned out.
Yeah.
I've really had to adjust how I spend my money, what support I get, how I value that. And I think if I was charging, say, £40 per client, like I wouldn't be making enough money to really live. And I'm in a lucky situation where I'm privileged in many ways, yet I would still be struggling. So I don't know how a lot of therapists do it,
Right.
both financially and emotionally with I've had so many conversations with therapists being like, I need my own personal therapy, but I can't really swing it right now. And that scares me, that people can't have that. And as therapists, we need that. We need people to hold that space for us too. So we at least need to be charging enough to be able to be held ourselves too, so we can do a good job.
Yeah. How do you stay confident when you're getting so many messages that are contrary to the way that you're doing your work?
I guess the power of social media, really, that I see so many other therapists, even if they're in different countries, even if they're more US based, doing it their own way and loving it. And I think that's really empowering. It's kind of taught me to just, I don't want to say fake it till I make it, because that's not exactly what I mean, but just learning to sit with that discomfort, learning to sit with criticism, learning to really have to dig deep within what I believe in and what makes sense to me, even if other people don't agree, because I think that makes it much easier if I know, I guess, my own version of my truth of what makes sense for me, to take it as a grain of salt when other people do their practice differently and know that, I guess, part of this kind of mind money balance in my head is that other people are going to have a different balance than me, and that's okay. And I'm allowed to have a different one too.
Yeah. Oh, I love that other folks are allowed to do what works for them. And in honoring how they do work, you also have to honor how you do work, and also have to honor what works best for you from a financial and emotional standpoint. I mean, Taylor, you've said several times, look, if I was seeing more people, if I was taking in less money, I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't show up as a fully resourced therapist. So I really appreciate you reiterating that. What about tangible tools? Any particular money podcasts, books, resources that you find yourself really loving?
Yeah, those ones I mentioned earlier, private practice skills, private practice workshop, you, Josie at the Healing Strategy, those are all ones that have been a regular kind of part of my listening during weeks and months. Yeah. I also love Tiffany Rowe. She's been a huge inspiration, what she's done with mindful counseling and the type of business work she does. She does talk money more and more now. And for UK-based people, Starling Bank Account is an online kind of banking service. It's fantastic and it tracks your money really well. It lets you have all these different saving pods, which as a business is so valuable to have all these different things. As I learned to like, okay, save for benefits and make sure I have enough money to taxes aside and do all these things that working for an organization I've not had to think of.
Right.
So that's been fantastic.
Oh, so fun. And I love having separate savings buckets. I've done, a podcast episode about it. I've written a blog post about it, but I so believe that psychologically we need to see where our money is going in order to make it more likely that we achieve those savings goals. So if you have all of your savings kind of lumped into one bucket, it's really hard to motivate yourself to continue to save. You have to do that mental math every time you log into your account of like, how much of this is going towards vacation? What if this is going to taxes? So yeah, anytime we can separate it out, I love that. And so it was called Starling Bank Account and it's for UK folks. Okay.
Yep.
Awesome.
I think it's just UK based.
Cool. Well, thank you, Taylor, so much. Before we wrap up, where can people find you and kind of what's happening in your world?
Yeah. So on Instagram, I'm at Not Broken, Just Human. And the name of my practice is justhumanTherapy.com. It's my website. And I guess a venture that I'm doing, kind of speaking to what we're talking about, is I do support groups for therapists online now, both UK based and we've had some American people too. So if anybody's interested, any therapists out there, they can find me on Instagram and I can sign them up to my wait list for that.
So say a little bit more about what that group is.
Yeah, so I started it last year, I guess with the pandemic and seeing therapists working so much. I'm like, therapists need more support. And I missed talking to other therapists, being in private practice, working online. So I did a 5-week kind of blocked out group where every Tuesday we met for an hour and a half and had a small group of therapists. And I did different themes kind of throughout the week and newsletters kind of reflecting back what we talked about in each session and kind of prepping for our next one. And it was fantastic. It reminded me of being back in school in some ways, in the most supportive ways that kind of our training can be.
Yeah.
And just trying to branch into doing more of those so I can, for my own energy, I love working with other therapists and talking about these things. And I think in the UK, especially, we need a bit more of that kind of peer support that is really accessible. And you can find it on Instagram, for example. It's not a secret, clubs that are hard to get into.
Right. And I think it's so important just to reiterate what you're talking about, which comes up time and time again with so many therapists that I've interviewed for this podcast, is talking about X in community makes it so much easier, whether it's how to run a private practice, whether it's how to manage your money, whether it's, just your own self-care and validation. We heal in community with others. So I keep getting that message and I'm like, there must be a reason I'm getting this message from everyone, but I really just think it's the reality. We do best when we're validated and supported with other folks who are going through similar things. So I appreciate that you have that available as a resource. And of course, all of the links to find Taylor will be linked in the show notes. And thanks again, Taylor, for joining us from Scotland. And yay, I'm so happy to have you on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Of course. Wasn't it nice to start out this conversation with a nice, light, and sweet story? I know for me, I really needed that. So let's get into the takeaways from my chat with Taylor. The first one that I wanted to get into is specifically for my Thera friends who are listening, is how she was able to see a private pay model work. And I think that's so important. So she cited seeing somebody else in a different practice where people were able to charge sustainable wages. And that gave her permission and the opportunity to do the same and to put it into practice. I think so many of us get caught up on like, we can't do this because we've never seen it happen before. And there is a lot of truth in that, right? That's why we talk about representation being so important in a broader sense. But specifically for Taylor's example, seeing somebody else do things outside of the way that things are just done really helped to give her the comfort and confidence to do it on her own. Takeaway number 2 is how Taylor said she uses social media as a support system. And I could not agree more. I know for me, over these past couple of months, I've been so thankful to be connected with my AAPI community through social media. And it's felt really, really good. But I think as therapists, it can also be helpful to see other folks who are out there doing big things. And Taylor cited following a couple of therapists, 2 of whom have been off the podcast. Hey. And she said that Marie Fang of Private Practice Skills and Josie Rosario of The Healing Strategy, along with Tiffany Rowe, have been people on social media that have been helpful for her to get information about both the strategy side of business and the money mindset side of business. And I think this is important when we're on social media. I know social media gets a bad rap. I have been in my feelings about social media more than once. So I think it's important to go, how can I curate my social media feed to provide me with information and inspiration instead of comparing myself to others, right? I mentioned in last week's episode with Stevan that so many therapists get worried about competition and being envious and being jealous, when the reality is we need to be looking toward collaboration, right? So in addition to Marie Fang and Josie Rosario, who've been on this podcast, and I've collaborated with Marie and Josie in other ways. Marie and I did a YouTube video swap a while back, and Josie actually was a guest expert in my last round of Grow a Profitable Practice from the Inside Out. I've collaborated with a ton of therapists who are, surprise, also in the private practice coaching space, whether it's through social media, like doing IG Lives, whether it's me being on their podcast or them being on my podcast, whether that is me being in like their mastermind as a guest expert or having them in my group coaching program as a guest expert. I think it is so important for us to acknowledge that there is more than enough to go around. Instead of me like keeping my head down and covering my paper, I'm like, whatever. There's more than enough to go around. And I think that connecting you to other people who are in this space also gives you an opportunity to hear how other folks are doing it. There's no one right way to do a private practice business. There's no one right way to do money, right? So I'm going to name drop a bunch of people who, if you have this scarcity mindset, this idea that there isn't enough to go around, and that if there's another person who's in your niche, then all of a sudden you can't do your job or you have to pivot your niche. It's like, no, having other people who do similar things is validation that your work is needed. And to me, it gives everybody an opportunity to find a person or people who best align with them. So whether you prefer small groups or large groups, there are business coaches for that. If you're more of an introvert or an extrovert, there are business coaches who have either similar personality traits or can speak to those folks who are either introverted or extroverted. Some of these private practice coaches do programs that are more cohort-based, like mine, and some are more kind of rolling. You can drop in, and some of these are like you drop into a group of hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands, and some of them are small, like 10 people, 5 people. Some of these people focus more on how to market your practice using social media, whereas other folks are like, let's figure out how to leverage your search engine optimization. Maybe some people are more like, just network with people in your area, right? There are so many different ways to build a private practice and to make your money work for you that we can have more than one of us in a specific niche. So let me get back to my name dropping. On the podcast, I've had Alyssa Gerlai of Creative Practice Building, Allison Purrier of Abundance Practice Building podcast. She was actually a guest expert in one of my rounds of Grow a Profitable Practice from the Inside Out. Annie Schussler of Rebel Therapist, she and I have been on each other's podcast. Tiffany McLean of Lean In Make Bank has been on my podcast. Danielle Swim of The Entrepreneurial Therapist has been on my podcast. Danielle Bailey, the Millennial Money Therapist, she and I have done Instagram Live. She's been on this podcast. Lindsay Bonham of Money Nuts and Bolts has been on this podcast. This is a good thing. Again, it means therapists are saying, hey, I need help talking about the business side of my practice, and I need these ideas reinforced or told to me in a different way, or I need to find a certain person who has a certain style to work with me. So this leads me to Grow a Profitable Practice from the Inside Out. It is my cohort-based group coaching program for private practice therapists. And today, April 5th, the doors are officially open. We get started in a month on Monday, May 3rd. Ooh, there was like a lot of M's there. I want for you to just pause for a second if you are a private practice therapist and you are thinking things like, I don't know how much money my practice needs to earn. I don't know what people are going to think about me if I charge more money. I'm just not good at money stuff. I don't think I can take time off or really enjoy a vacation. If I raise my rates, if I leave insurance panels, I'm going to lose clients. If you find yourself thinking those things, I want for you to A, know that you're not alone, and B, imagine knowing that you could be comfortable, confident, and in charge of your practice's finances without sliding your scale, slowly raising your fee over time, or internally wanting to throw up when you think about the hourly fee you are going to charge for your time and energy and expertise. And if you're like, there's no way that isn't possible, I'm absolutely here to tell you that it is. In my 3-month group coaching program, we will address money mindset and setting a sustainable fee before we ever touch on the marketing, because I think so many therapists get caught up in, oh my gosh, I need to curate my Instagram feed, or I need to start a podcast, or I need to start blogging. And they get ahead of themselves in like trying to promote their practice before they have gotten a handle on the business side of it to really figure out how much money do I need to be earning to sustain my lifestyle and thrive and to provide myself with good self-care so that I can show up fully resourced for my clients. So if you are curious about what it would look like if you could take time off of work without sweating, saying yes to aligned clients with ease, and having a group of others, because Grow a Profitable Practice from the Inside Out is cohort-based, and having others that you could talk money with, I strongly encourage you to hop over to mindmoneybalance.com/profitable practice. All of the details are there. I am a Virgo. I answered every possible FAQ. And if not, I even put my email in there so you can literally email me and say, Lindsay, I have a question about this. You didn't answer it. I will make sure to get back to you. But if you are, again, listening to this in real time, we start on Monday, May 3rd, 2021, and applications are due by April 28th, 2021, to give me enough time to make sure that folks who are interested in joining are really a good fit. They're at a good point in their practice where it makes sense. I am not just saying like anybody who wants to join can join. It has to be a mutual fit. It has to be that you are ready and willing and able to show up and do some of the work, and that you are far enough along in your practice for it to be beneficial for you. All right, so that's my tangent that was spurred by Taylor saying how she uses social media as a support system, which was takeaway number 2. So takeaway number 3, how's that for some slick marketing? I don't know if that is the way that you're supposed to do it, but it just felt right when I heard her talking about her ability to connect with other therapists via social media. I was like, oh yeah. And it just like piggybacked beautifully off of what Steven and I were talking about last week about finding inspiration from other therapists instead of feeling like jealous and competitive. All right, big exhale. Takeaway number 3, standing in her truth and knowing what works for her. This one really made me feel like I could exhale. Essentially, Taylor said, look, I know other people do things differently, but I know what I need energetically, emotionally, and financially that will work in my practice. So this is about not judging others for how they operate their practice, how they manage their money, but it's about saying, I'm glad that works for you, and I'm going to do things my way, and how having that confidence can help you to feel really good, whether you're a private practice owner or not. If you are here listening because you just like learning about the emotional side of money, I encourage you to think about what are the things that other people do with their money that you're like, cool, That's good. You do you. I'm going to do things my way, right? We don't have to compete with one another. We don't have to compare ourselves to one another. Don't judge others for how they do their money. Operate under the assumption that, folks are trying to do the best they can with what they've got, and give yourself that same grace and compassion of, I can do things my own way with what I have, and I'm comfortable asking for help when needed, and I won't judge myself for how I am managing my money. So to recap, the 3 takeaways are the importance of seeing other people make things work for them, the importance of curating your social media feed to not make you go into a spiral, but to really help you to feel supported and in community with others. And then finally, standing in your own truth. Find what works for you, make it work, and go with it. I was going to say flow with it. That's not me, but yeah. Hey, flow with it if you want to flow with it. And I will see you next week. Neither the host or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, medical, or other professional information. If you want professional help, please seek it out.